You don't have to worry about it because you're not business owners yet, but you're going to be aware when you walk into a premier office that you're going to really have to look at those numbers, okay? Any questions on that? Yeah.
When you mentioned the income office versus Delta Premier, you don't adjust that for the...
I don't see, the sellers typically say that's not my fault. Okay, but I like to see a little bit of adjustment. I like, but another thing that's really funny is the premier providers are typically not doing what you guys are doing coming out of the gate. Okay, they're not doing endo, they're not doing difficult extractions, they're not doing Invisalign, they're not doing sleep dentistry with the exception of Dr. Wyman. You can add procedures that can make up for that. Okay, so don't be afraid to buy that practice. Look at the thing. You might have a guy or a gal that's selling the practice that it's like a watch factory. They don't do crowns. They're doing big amalgams. You know, you might have a gold mine there that you can bring these people in. They might send out a lot of referrals. You can keep that dentistry in your office, so those numbers will go back up quickly. But just be aware of what you're getting into. Okay, fee for service. This is what you went to school for, what you're going to school for. This is to charge what you want to charge for your practice, okay? So you're not contracted with insurance companies. If your patients have insurance, you are considered probably out of network. They pay the full fee, and then they go through their insurance to try to get reimbursed. This is an awesome practice. Corporate dentistry is moving west, so we still have them in California. I don't know how many. Yeah. So I don't know how many fee-for-service practices there are, but if you find one, they're great. I love to work for a fee-for-service practice. Do you still have a lot of them left? Yeah.
We had LVI here.
Uh-huh.
They preach fee-for-service. In Las Vegas, it's almost next to impossible to do a fee-for-service practice. The only ones that are still doing it are from the old heydays that they're still working off of that patient base.
Yeah.
But you need the DPOs to survive.
Yes, but don't go into an office that's doing pretty well and then think you have to sign up for a bunch of PPOs because they're hard to get rid of. So there's a fine line because you're working for a lot less. But most, I say 95% of practice you're going to look at are going to be PPO-driven practices. Okay. All right. Any questions on startups? Oh, I wanted to say one thing, too, about startups. When you're building out an office, we're always talking about you've got the shell, okay, and how much it costs to build out that office. Are you guys familiar with what's called a cost segregation study? Okay, Roy is. So basically what you do is you start off with a building. It's a box. You're going to build some walls. You're going to put lights in. You're going to plumb your office. You're going to put a bathroom in. There's stuff that we call leasehold improvements. And leasehold improvements in a dental office are usually written off over 39 years. That's the depreciable life of a leasehold improvement. So when you have what's called a cost segregation study, they're going to go into that building and they say, well, let's look at what we really did. We bought that, we put that light in to shine on this piece of equipment. That light now becomes equipment. We put the plumbing into not the bathroom plumbing, but the plumbing into the chair. That's dental equipment. Now we're writing it off either over 5 years or 1 year with a really great Section 179 deduction that you can take. So it's always a good idea to have a cost segregation study done if you're spending more than $250 for the build out. Any questions on that one? Okay. Okay, so I'm done with scratch startups. I'm going to move into if you're purchasing a dental practice. So if I go a little quick, let me know. There's a lot of information to cover here. Okay, so across the country, practices are generally valued at 60 to 80% of prior 12 months collections. In Southern California, it's more like 85 or 90, so they're a little bit higher where I am. Specialty practices are different. Do I have any specialists in here? Ortho? Okay. Ortho, they're higher. Are they higher out here, Bob?
Yep.
Okay. So endo and perio, 60 to 70%, and I'm talking about of collections. Oral surgery, 65 to 75. Pediatric and ortho, 80 to 90. Okay, so when I'm looking, I don't value practices. I'm not a broker. I'm not accredited to value practices, but I'm kind of just giving you an idea of what we come up with to make sure that the price looks reasonable for you. Okay, so as opposed to Bob, who works for sellers, you do dual agency sometimes? Or do you? Okay, good. Because I don't like the ones that say they do, because it just doesn't make any sense. But when you're, so the broker's going to put together that, what did you call it, something, your P&L? Okay, I call it add backs.
Same.
Yeah. Okay, so you're going to get these add backs. So we want to see what the true profit is, because you might be paying 70% of collections, but the overhead might be sky high, so it's not worth 70% of collections. Okay, it's going to be worth a little bit less. So we're going to look at the true net income. So let's just say you've got a practice that's $1 million, or they do $1 million. Typical general dental practice is going to net 32 to 35%. So let's say we want a net income of $350. So if we take 350 times 2, that's 700. We now got 70%. Makes sense. Okay, it's just a quick little figure. If the rent is sky high and your salaries are sky high and something else is sky high and that thing only nets about 20%, that's 200,000. 200 times 2 is 4. Now your practice isn't worth $700,000 anymore when you look at it from that aspect. So most brokers, when they're doing it, you do the value a couple different ways.
Right.
Yeah, and average it in.
The national average of bottom line after recasting is 1.6.
It's hot up here. 1.7? Okay. Sorry, I'm going to fan myself. I told Cheryl, hot flush. Okay, so practices collecting under 600 are desirable because they're affordable and they can be grown. Again, like Roy was saying, don't go in and say, okay, I'm going to spend $600,000 on a practice, but I want to make it $1 million practice, but I'm stuck in between a 7-Eleven and a dry cleaner. I think that was the thing you used. Yeah, or the massage parlor. You can't bust out through the walls, so you want to make sure that you're thinking, beforehand what your goals are. Buy the space, get an option, find out what's next door. Can you bust a wall? Can you get bigger if you want to get bigger? Okay, so practices under 300, where the price is under 300, they can almost be considered a startup. But they're not as easy to finance. For some reason, banks will lend you $300,000 on a startup. But if you're purchasing a practice, they're going to cash flow the hell out of that thing. They're going to question you on everything. So they want to know, how can we control the profit and the cash flow and the overhead? And they think you can do a better job with a startup than a low priced. Because at $300,000, you've still got to staff it. That staff can probably cost you the same as if you're doing $600,000. Okay, so the valuation depends on the profitability. Do you guys have any questions on this slide? Okay. Oh, that's okay. All right, so important factors in looking for a practice. We want to live in the community. Roy touched on this. Live in the community you're going to practice in. How much net cash flow do you want to live on? Are you single? Are you married? Do you have 7 kids? What is it you need? So don't go buy a $300,000 practice if you need to net $300,000. Now we're going to be looking at the higher value practices. Are you conservative, aggressive, middle of the road? As far as your treatment planning goes. So you want to make sure you have similar philosophy with the seller. Look at their charts, look at their treatment planning. Don't get stuck that the seller does not have all the newest equipment. I think digital x-ray is very important. The rest you can get as you go. Okay, so you're not looking for the state-of-the-art practice. If you find it, that's awesome, but don't get stuck if everything else looks good. We talked about, do you want a fee-for-service, PPOs, HMOs, or a mix, and what size practice do you want? Again, don't buy the small little location if you want the big practice. Okay, are you guys familiar with the due diligence? Okay, some are, some aren't. When you make an offer on a practice, Bob was talking about you make the offer, you sign the letter of intent. The letter of intent is going to have contingencies, one of which is the review of the books and records. Another one's the review of the lease, the ability to obtain financing. These things are all listed. If something falls through, you're basically out of the deal. What I like to look at, and I do this in my office, 2 years at least business tax returns. So right now I've got 4 of these going on in my office. I'm looking at 15, 2016, and 2017. So I haven't gotten a 17 tax return yet because the filing deadline hasn't happened, so I want to see at least 2 years tax returns. I want to look at 2 years profit and loss statement. Profit and loss statement, I think Bob said, is going to give you a little more information than the tax return. Tax return is going to group expenses. The profit and loss statement is going to spell a little bit more out. You'll see staff salary, payroll expense line item on the tax return, but on the P&L you'll see hygiene, you'll see front office, you'll see RDA. It's a little more detailed generally on the P&L. Very important, this is my top one, 2 years detailed general ledger. If you're looking at a P&L and it says dental supplies, I want to know what's in dental supplies. Patterson, Shine, should be just Shine, I guess. I don't want to see, crazy things over my years. I've seen a bar mitzvah in dental supplies. I've seen a wedding, and the best one was a hair transplant. Okay, so I want to see what is in there. I want to pull these things back out. Okay, so these are what we call add backs. Okay, and that gives you so much detail as to what's going on. What kind of equipment did they buy? Do they pay their staff bonuses without running it through the payroll? How are they reimbursing for medical insurance? This tells me everything about the practice. So it's like a CSI investigation kind of a thing when we're looking at these dental practices. I go on the websites. I want to see if there's an associate in the office. I want to see what the reviews are. I kind of go through everything you can possibly do to see if this practice is the right fit for you. I look at monthly production and collection reports. I want to make sure that what the collection report says ties to I skipped one, bank statements. Got to verify all the deposits. If they say they collect $1 million, I want to see $1 million going into the bank. Payroll reports, I want to look for employee turnover, see who's being paid. Is there a spouse in the office that's paid? That's fine. If the spouse leaves, you've got to replace that, okay? If the spouse is in the office and is unpaid and leaves, you've got to replace it, and now our cash flow is changing. Okay, the current aging of accounts receivable in California, where I'm looking at the majority of these, we are not selling the accounts receivable, so we want to look at the aging just to see what the collection procedures are in the office. If you're over 90 days or huge, we've got a problem. Typically, accounts receivable are going to be 75% of an average month's collection in that office. Current fee schedule, we want to see what they're being charged. We want to also compare you to different offices in that zip code to see, are you low, are you high? Can we do a fee balancing once you're in that office? And I always like to look at the broker summary if available, because they have a little more insight than I do as to what's going on. They've spoken with the seller. They know they can answer a lot of our questions by just looking at the broker summary. Okay, any questions on that? Okay. What's going on in the practice? Family members, we talked about family members working. Associates that have been there for over a year, what are they up to and why are they not buying the practice? Let's look at the hygiene department. Hygiene department should produce about 30% of total production in an office. And of that 30% should be in the perio maintenance, those 4,000 codes, the ADA codes. So,
No, I'll turn it down.
Yeah, I'm dying up here. Yeah. Well, that light is like casting quite a glow.
Blame this young lady right here. She had me turn it off.
Oh, okay. So does the seller work in any other offices? Are there any other sources of income reported on that tax return? Do they lecture? Do they rent space? What is included in those collections? Be sure the dental lender received the same information that you did. I've done deals before where I say, I'll call the lender and go, you're lending on this? Did you see that dental supplies are 26%? And they're like, no, it looked like 5% to me. Different sets of books are out there, believe me, some weird stuff. So this is why we look at so much information, just to make sure that what is being represented to me has been represented to you and to your lender. We talked about as a practice collecting copays. You want to make sure you're not waiving the copays. If they are, your patients are going to expect you to waive the copays. So we want to get that figured out. And does the seller own the building? This thing might cash flow so well because no one realized there's no rent expense on the P&L. Okay, so these are the things we want to ask. So just get a feel. Go on the website. Just Google them. Find out everything you can. Read all the reviews. Now, when you're in practice, you will know, I don't know what it's like here, but do you recommend that they do not respond to reviews due to HIPAA compliance? Yeah, okay. So if someone says you're the worst dentist they've ever seen, don't go, no, I'm not, because you just acknowledged your doctor-patient relationship. Sometimes you just have to suck it up. Okay. You had questions on allocation? I just wanted to touch on allocation when you're talking about how do you value goodwill. Okay, so Bob said he puts the CPAs together. That's how he values the goodwill. So I'm one of those, and I will argue with your seller's CPA as to what's best for you. Goodwill is good for the seller. It is not as good for you. And that's because seller can get capital gains treatment on the sale, which is a lower tax bracket. You have to amortize it over 15 years. I like to see more in equipment. Again, this has no bearing on reality. There's no way there's $150,000 worth of equipment in that office, okay? So, but we want that because we want that first year big write-off. Supplies, I usually go off the P&L, take total supplies for the year, divide by 12. When you buy a practice, there should be 30 days worth of supplies on the shelf. They can't clean you out and leave you with nothing. Covenant not to compete, that again is enforceable against the seller. You don't want the seller moving next door. So there's usually I see 5-year, 15-mile to 20-mile radius. Again, it depends on your area. I once had a deal where the guy did a 5-mile radius. The seller had an office 5 miles away, and I said, don't buy this practice. Just don't buy the practice, but he did anyway. And 3 months later, he was out of business. Patients just went over to the other guy. Goodwill, I think this is a standard that looks like a 70% allocation. I'm okay with 70%. I don't like to see that go much higher than 70. So I'm not valuing the goodwill. I'm just saying that's not a good allocation for you if it goes much higher than that. So that's how we allocate that. Bob was saying you file a form. I think it's called an 8594. It goes on your tax return, goes on the seller's tax return. They have to agree. In my 30 years of practice, I've never seen one audited. So IRS is not challenging allocations as long as it's an agreed upon transaction. Okay, any questions on the allocation? I think that's it before I pass out up here. I'm gonna go sit down and grab some water. Do you guys have any questions? Okay, if you do, I'll be here. You can talk to me later.